Всем привет, soy Javier Poveda y esto es De Bien TV, el canal donde te lo vas a pasar de bien mientras aprendes geografía, historia del arte, economía y un pelín de empresariales. Este vídeo es para mis alumnos de cuarto de la ESO de sección CEIPSO el Encinar de Torrelodones. In this video we are going to study maybe the best part of the course, which is the Russian Revolution, the second part of the Unit 6, so let's go. Qué calor da este gorro. So, the First World War and the Russian Revolution, this is the second part with this picture of the Soviet of Petrograd. So, let's go. The Russian Revolution happened in 1917 when the Russian Empire went through a revolutionary process which put an end to the autocratic government of the Tsar Nicholas II. Nicholas II started reigning in 1894 and he will be dethroned in 1917. There will be two revolutions, the Revolution of February, in which the a provisional government started with Alexander Kerensky, and later in October the Socialist Revolution by the Bolsheviks, by Vladimir Lenin, which led to the creation later after their victory in the Civil War of the USSR in 1922. So let's start. So the Tsar regime had these characteristics. It was an autocratic government because he had unlimited power and authority. It was kind of an absolute monarchy. Why? Because Russia didn't have any bourgeois revolutions. If you remember the 1820, 1830 and 1848 revolutions, they did not affect Russia, so this regime was kind of an absolute monarchy. The economy was semi-feudal. Why? Because Russia was a very rural country and their industrialization started very late at the end of the 19th century and concentrated in very specific areas in the two major cities, St. Petersburg and Moscow. And also because there was social unrest, because most of the Russian population were peasants who lived in extreme poverty and they had to pay a lot of taxes. And if you add this to the events that will happen at the beginning of the 20th century, the 1905 revolution, the Russo-Japanese War, and the participation of Russia in the First World War, well, you will have this kind of revolution. So, So, what were the causes of the revolution? Well, we can name some of them. The most important were the Russo-Japanese War of 1904 to 1905, in which Russia was defeated. She was humiliated by the Japanese. The Japanese were fighting for their own empire and their own sphere of influence in Eastern Asia. So they collided with the Russians because the Russians also had interests there in to control the Asian markets and China, and they were defeated. And then the appearance of political parties. They were illegal, but they were they existed. Okay, despite being forbidden. Then the 1905 revolution, which was a consequence of this Russo-Japanese War, in which some workers of St. Petersburg made a strike and they went to protest in front of the Winter Palace, which was the residence of the Tsar, and most of them were shot by the guards, and that is known. Well, we know this event as the Bloody Sunday, Domingo Sangriento. And after that, there was a lot of unrest, and the Soviets were created for the first time. A Soviet is an assembly. It's the translation of the word in Russian. And they organized the protest, and finally Nicholas II had to make or had to give some concessions, for example, some political reforms and the creation of the Duma, which is the name in Russian for the parliament. but this Duma didn't last for so long, and the autocracy was reestablished soon after. And finally, maybe the most important reason is the participation in the First World War. We already know that the Russians were crushed in the Eastern Front by the Germans, which led to the unrest within the army and within the workers and the peasants, who were starving. These are the Japanese cruisers at the Battle of Tsushima, which was the main battle of the Russo-Japanese War. The Russian fleet was practically destroyed, and the Japanese won the war. The political parties that were created, there were several political parties. The most important ones were the Constitutional Democratic Party, Los Cadetes, which was a liberal party, the Socialist Revolutionary Party, which were non-Marxist socialists, los eseristas, SR, Kerensky was part of this party, and the Socialist Workers' Party, which was divided between the Mensheviks and the Bolsheviks. The Mensheviks were the minority, and the Bolsheviks, which Lenin was the leader of this faction of this party, were the ones who controlled this party and the main protagonist of the revolutions. This is a photo of the Bloody Sunday, the guard which later shot at the protesters in front of the Winter Palace. This is a video of the Bloody Sunday if you want to watch it, not now. And this is the opening of the Duma in 1906 after the concessions the Tsar Nicholas II had to give to the protesters after the Bloody Sunday. And now we reach the year 1917 with the two revolutions. The Russian Revolution had two phases: the first revolution in February, the Liberal Bourgeois Revolution, and the Socialist Proletariat Revolution in October. So let's start with the first. In February, there was a successful revolution of workers in Petrograd, which was the name of St. Petersburg at that year. St. Petersburg changed its name several times during the 20th century. It was supported by the soldiers and the peasants. It started with a strike of the Putilov factory, the workers of the Putilov factory, and then it led to the dethroning of the Tsar and the establishment of a provisional government in March now of 1917, which was made up of liberals and Menshevik socialists and led, well, first by the Prince Lvov, but later by the social revolutionary Alexander Kerensky. This new government established a republic because the Tsar was forced to abdicate and he was arrested with his family, and they began to set up a democratic regime. They legalized all the political parties that we have seen before and called election for the end of the year with universal male suffrage to establish a constituent assembly. They wanted to create the first constitution of the newly formed Russian Republic. But despite these political reforms, this provisional government failed for many reasons. But the most important reason was that they continued the war. They didn't want to withdraw from the First World War, despite they were being crushed by the Germans and the Central Powers in every part of the front. And what happened that a parallel government was formed, led by the Soviets, and specifically by the Petrograd Soviet. Remember that in this period, the capital of Russia, of the Russian Empire and the Russian Republic, was Petrograd, was St. Petersburg, and this Petrograd Soviet was controlled by the Bolsheviks, and they demanded the withdrawal of Russia from the war. Why? Because Lenin said very wisely that they could not make a socialist revolution while at war. So these Bolsheviks were steady, gaining support from both the workers and the peasants, mostly from the workers and from the soldiers. And Lenin, who was in exile, came back to Russia with the help of the Germans, and he wrote and proclaimed his April thesis, Las Tesis de Abril, in which he sewed up his political agenda, in which they, the Bolsheviks, they advocate for some reforms favoring the workers, the soldiers and the peasants, and mainly the redistribution of land among them and the withdrawal from the war. Here, this is the start of the February Revolution with the strike of the women, the wives of the workers in the Pultilo factory. This is the royal family, the Romanovs, the Tsar, his wife Alexandra, the Tsarevich, Alexei, and their 4 daughters. Okay, this is Anastasia, the famous Anastasia Romanov, who was called to force she survived the assassination of the royal family. Bullshit. She was shot also alongside her family. And this is the first provisional government. This is Alexander Kerensky here, and also here in his office while he was in charge of the government. This is the Soviet of Petrograd, the first, this is the photo that I showed you at the beginning. And here all the workers and soldiers of Petrograd were represented. Forward. These are the April theses that were presented by Lenin in front of the Soviet of Petrograd in the Tauride Palace on the 4th of April of 1917. As you can see here, they didn't support the provisional government, and they wanted to withdraw from the war and to redistribute the land in favor of the peasants. And then we have the October Revolution. In this revolution that happened in October, the Bolsheviks, which were controlling the Soviets, not only the Soviet of Petrograd, but many Soviets that appear in all Russia, they were led by Lenin and Lev Trotsky. Lenin was the main political leader, and Trotsky was part of the Bolshevik party, and he organized the Red Guard and later the Red Army. They attacked the Winter Palace in Petrograd, which was the seat of the provisional government, and they managed to overthrow them, and establish a new proletarian government called the Council of People's Commissar, el Consejo de Comisarios del Pueblo, or the Sovnarkom, Sovietsky Narodny Commissariat. So Lenin became the Russia's leader until his death in 1924, in which was succeeded by Stalin, by Joseph Stalin. So the first actions of Lenin in the government were the signing of the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk with Germany. They withdrew from the war in exchange of many territories in their western border. We know about this because we studied that in the previous part of this lesson. They expropriated the land and redistributed it among the peasants, and gave the control of industries to the workers' committees. They are socializing the means of production. Okay, they are following the Marxist doctrine. They changed, the name of the Bolshevik Party to the Communist Party, and it was made the only legal political party. It was a dictatorship. And they also found the Third International, which is called the Comintern, the Communist International, to coordinate all the communist parties around the world. And this Comintern will be very important in the Inter-Years War period, but we will study that later. But after that, many people opposed this new workers' government, this Bolshevik government, so in 1918 a civil war broke out and lasted until 1922. The Red Army, the army of the newly formed government, fought the White Army, which were the people who supported the Tsar, or who supported the liberals or the bourgeois, And eventually the Red Army won, despite the support that the White Army had from all the main powers of the world: the British, the French, the Americans, the Japanese. Many of them invaded Russia and supported these rebels, the White Army, but the Red Army was successful. So, well, this is the cruiser Aurora. This is today's photo, because this is the first warship who bombed the Winter Palace, and the Soviets preserved it, and you can visit it now because it's a museum in St. Petersburg. This is the attack of the Winter Palace. You have to know this date. The date of the October Revolution is the 7th of November of 1917. It is called the October Revolution because the Russians still were using the Julian calendar, the calendar that Julius Caesar established back in 2000 years ago. Okay, they didn't follow, or they didn't use the Gregorian calendar, which is the calendar that we use today. That is why it is called the October Revolution. Later the Soviets changed it by the Gregorian calendar. This is Lev Trotsky, which is giving a speech to the Red Guards. The Red Guards was the militia formed by the Soviets. And this one specifically is the Red Guard of the Soviet of Petrograd. And this is the Sovnarkom, the Council of People's Commissar, after the success of the October Revolution. This is the signing of the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk in 1918, and this is the decree on land, in which the government ended with the private property of the land. And the Congress of the Comintern of the Communist International, this one is the second one in 1920. The Russian Civil War, the Red Army mostly controlled the most part of the, a big part of the European Russia with the big cities, and they were attacked by or from every side, from the south, from the west, from the north, from the west, from every part of the territory. Here you have the Americans parading in Vladivostok, which is in the far east of the Russian Empire. And despite all of this support and of the power of all these forces, the Red Army won the war. This is the Ipatiev house in Yekaterinburg. Here the royal family, this is in Russia, where the royal family, the Romanovs, were kept prisoners during the Civil War. The Bolsheviks moved them there because of the advance of the White Army, and they were shot finally because... Okay, no, I don't want the video to be... If you want, you can watch the video. They were shot because the White Army was very close to this city, so to prevent them from being rescued, they killed them all. And that was the end of the Romanov dynasty. So, in 1922, after their victory in the Civil War, they created the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, the USSR, la URSS, la Unión de Repúblicas Socialistas Soviéticas. And they wrote a constitution 2 years later in 1924, which established their government institutions and their territorial organization. The USSR was organized as a proletariat dictatorship, remember, following Marxism, and the political power was held by the Soviets, which were controlled by the proletariat. Well, they were controlled by the Communist Party. And the Soviets were the legislative power. Remember that the executive power was held by the Council of People's Commissar. And the only political party was the newly formed, the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, the CPSU, which represented the interests of the workers. But Lenin was forced to postpone the implementation of socialism. Despite he proclaimed the decree on land and many other decrees, he had to go back because of the shortage of food and many other goods caused by the civil war. So he have to reestablish in some areas of in some means of production, in some industries, in the little industries, the capitalism again. And this was called the New Economic Policy, the NEP, la NEP, which allowed some capitalist systems to exist to increase production. Why? Because they were devastated after the war. So the peasants could sell their produce and small private artisan and trading companies were set up. But only the peasants and small industries. The big industries, the heavy industries or the banks, they were still in control of the government. The state controlled the important sectors such as large industries, foreign trade and banks. Okay, this was later ended by Stalin after the death of Lenin. The USSR was also a federal state that included Russia, but also many other republics, Ukraine, Belarus, the Caucasian republics, all the Central Asia republics, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, And they accepted the Soviet system, so the Soviet Union was formed as a federal state, which the representatives of every republic, they were seated at the Soviet of the nationalities. This is the flag of the Soviet Union, of the USSR, with the red star and the hammer and sickle, representing the workers of the industries and the peasants. This is the coat of arms with the red star, the wheat, and this motto in all of the languages of the Union, and it says "Workers of the World Unite," which is the end of the Communist Manifesto of 1848, and this is the emblem of the CPSU. This is the Soviet Union in 1922 when it was formed, and later they will gain some more territory. They will re-annex the Baltic republics, and later they will gain territory here after the World War II. But at this moment, this was the extension of the USSR. And the end. This is the Soviet national anthem, maybe the best anthem in the world. I have no proof, yet I have no doubt about it. So, nos vamos con esto. Espero que os haya gustado y ya sabéis, a ver si empieza. Es precioso, se sigue usando hoy en día la música como himno de la Federación Rusa, pero le han cambiado la letra, evidentemente. Con esto me voy ya, espero que os haya gustado este vídeo, espero que os haya ayudado, ya sabéis, seguidme en todas mis redes sociales y nos vemos en el próximo vídeo, tovarish y tovarishas, o como se diga en ruso. Adiós.